This is a story, Joe, about the most extreme sports football dad that I've ever known.
So by extreme, we mean like drunk at a game shouting at his kid?
This is from crib to death football father. And what it is, it's a Todd Marinovich story. And Todd Marinovich was the son of Marv Marinovich. And Marv was a sports and conditioning guy. He worked for a lot of NFL teams. He worked for some collegiate teams. His best gig was he was the strength and conditioning coach for the Oakland Raiders.
Okay.
And he was a scientist. He was way before his time in lifting weights. Back in his days in the 60s and 70s, it was thought in sports that lifting weights was not good. It made you less flexible, it had less speed, less agility.
Oh, I heard about this. Like the people used to believe you'd become muscle bound, that you'd like your shoulders would be too tight to reach your back or something like that.
It's so silly now, but so he had a son, and his son's name was Todd Marinovich. And I followed this story his whole life. It's a fascinating story. So Marv said, I'm going to make my son, they call him test tube baby, I'm going to make him the best football quarterback in the history of the world. So he was bred to be a superstar. Now, my favorite thing is, and I saw this years ago, Marv is on TV talking about his son, and he talks about when he was a baby, he would take the baby's leg and stretch him all the way back to do a split.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So when I mean literally from when it was a few months old, he started training this kid.
Because I'm the pop culture mind, I'm going to just insert the training footage from Rocky IV, where the big Russian is just in a lab and he's being just bred to destroy.
It's funny you say that because he went out and he got sports psychologist, sports psychologist, he got biochemist to build his kid. So he nutrition dieting. He built this kid. This kid never ever had a happy meal in his life.
Holy crap. Okay. So pop culture for the win. That's not far off.
So Marv put 100% of his resources and his time. So not just his experience as a strength and conditioning guy, but also as a football coach. And his wife, his daughter, nothing else mattered to him except making Todd the best NFL quarterback the world's ever seen. So he thrived in elementary school, middle school. He was on travel teams. And it got him to college. He was the starter at USC, which is a huge college program. So then the day came in 1991. He was drafted in the first round by the Los Angeles Raiders, his dad's old team.
So we all know that overbearing sports dads, they totally will be satisfied by one victory. So I'm sure this made him happy with his son now and forever, right?
Right. Well, we'll go back to when he was a kid. It wasn't uncommon for his dad to be punching out other parents. He one time threw the neighbor over the fence. Again, assault charges all the time, abuse at home. He wanted to make Todd so competitive. He even make him box bigger, stronger kids and let him get the shit beat out of him.
That is junkyard dog mentality. That's crazy.
It was terrible. And Todd, as a young boy, what did he want to do? He just wanted to please his father. So his whole life was violence, competitiveness, and physical abuse. Being a first-round pick, this guy was better than anyone before. He had all the potential in the world. He had a rocket for an arm. He could run. He could see things. He was more mature because he'd been brought up in this culture of football his whole life. He was ahead of everybody else physically, but mentally from this years of violence and abuse, he was so insecure. He was so scared. He was like a little pet that was trapped and beaten.
So basically, like the Spartan method of training somebody from birth, you go to the agoge or whatever, they would just beat them until they were as aggressive as possible in their sport. Yeah, water's for the weak, right? Just let them be
right. Like animal. That's a good one. A Spartan comparison is, yeah, I never thought of it. That's dead on. Todd, even though he was a first-round pick, he's a can't miss to be a pro quarterback for 10, 12 years. Because of his emotional problems, he turned to drugs and alcohol. He became a raging alcoholic, a drug addict too. He was doing meth, heroin, cocaine, weed, everything. And his life just spiraled out of control.
Holy hell. Okay. He did not. I mean, he didn't just go after the light burnout. Like, that's a lot of hard drugs.
Yeah, to be a first-round quarterback, you usually play, even if you're terrible, even if you don't work out, you usually play for 3 full seasons of 16 games a season. He only played for 8 games his whole career. Not even 1 full season, half of 1 season.
Damn. Okay.
And he accounts it too, and psychologists count it now as he wasn't loved as a child. He was beaten and embarrassed.
Okay. So, if we're just talking about like strictly trying to build a kid to have your talent, this kind of seems like a pretty stark example of that not working.
Yeah, and the measurable thing, of course, is the money. Most NFL quarterbacks retire with about $50 million. Today, Todd Marinovich, it's a cautionary tale. It's worth about $20,000, or a Toyota Corolla.
Wow. Okay.
And with all his talent and ability, I'm just going to leave this part with this one quote. And this is from Marv. This is a cautionary tale. It's from an SI, Sports Illustrated article. I know you know what SI means, Joe. None of our history points or research points ever come from Sports Illustrated from Joe. I know this is one of mine.
Yeah, there might be a trend there, but go ahead. I'm into this.
Okay. Marv knew one way to live, through sports. And his son would commit to that way completely. All Marv wanted to mold was athletes. And Todd was his favorite piece of clay. You're listening to The Re-Engineered You. This is a podcast about self-empowerment and all the myths, lies, and misconceptions we tell ourselves. Then we use science and history to bust those myths and re-engineer a better you. I'm your host, Todd Laments, the extrovert.
And I'm the writer, researcher, and introvert, Joe Anthony, whose job it is to dig through the outer layer of no-dawn on the internet and get to the facts. This is going to be the second half of our 2-part podcast about legacy, what we try to give our children when we're gone, and what we actually leave behind. In part 1, we talked about Easy Eddie O'Hare, the mob lawyer who helped bring down Al Capone, and we answer questions about inheritance and reputation. On this episode, Legacy Part 2, we're focused on talent. Can we pass talent onto our children? If I'm a genius football coach, why can't I turn my son into a star quarterback from birth? Or what about William Sidis? If I'm a doctor and I marry a doctor, we should have genius doctor kids, right? So those are our myths.
Myth 1. If I want a sports kid, I should make them do sports. If I want a creative kid, I should make them do art. No need to fill their heads with useless subjects. Myth 2. Can I live through my kids? Dance moms do it. Drunk football dads do it. Is there something wrong with enjoying my child's achievements a bit too much? Myth 3. Can we train our kids from birth? If I super glue a golf club in my kid's hand, can I make the next Tiger Woods? We'll get to the myths about passing talent down through our children. But first, I want to remind Joe about Easy Eddie, the mob lawyer who died to get his son into the right academy.
Okay, so in the first part, we talked about basically a crooked mob lawyer who worked with Al Capone. And he was, to put it in a very nice way, he gave up a very sort of crooked life to get his son into the Naval Academy. Now, I seem to sort of run into, over and over again, websites that claim that Easy Eddie was taking down the mob while his son was taking down the Japanese. Like that they were sort of... they're both doing something noble, even though Easy Eddie was kind of a shyster lawyer. Do you think that's a fair comparison?
There's some fair comparison. The fair one being, I think every time somebody does something for themselves, even good, there's some selfishness to it, right?
I suppose that's true. Yeah, it's not like, I mean, if you're going off to war to be a hero, I guess there is at least a certain amount of wanting to be a hero. So there is some of that.
The problem is the timeline doesn't line up. He was taking down Capone. He ratted out Capone, flipped on Capone to the IRS, which is funny too. He wasn't arrested, Joe, and trying to get himself out of trouble. He sought out the IRS and said, let's charge the biggest gangster in the history of the world, or the history of our country, a murderer, with tax fraud.
Right. That I think I'm with you. That to me speaks that he had something in mind, and it wasn't just, panic. It wasn't like he was being interviewed by the cops right then.
And not that I'm judging, but here on the Re-Engineer You, we don't judge, but we measure. I think ratting on your business partner and getting into a fighter pilot and saving 2,000 people on an aircraft carrier, the second holds a little more weight with me.
Yeah, I think that's. I kind of like the idea of like a gritty turnaround story, but just being a straight up true blue hero, that's pretty heavy too.
Come on, Top Gun, baby.
Yeah. So Eddie gets Butch into the Naval Academy. He manages to swing that and clean up his act and get his reputation straight enough for Butch to end up on the Lexington. And then when Butch goes up to defend the Lexington, he does it against bombers, right?
He did. And he was in a position with his co-pilot. His co-pilot's weapon, his gun went down. So Butch was the only one with a weapon. He's the head pilot, so usually he's supposed to be staring, not shooting as much.
Okay, so one guy in an outdated fighter going against how many bombers?
But Butch O'Hare, for starters, was out of position. He was flying with some other fighter pilots, but he got left behind. He got cut to the side. And what happened was all these bombers were coming. 8 of them were coming for the Lexington to bomb it with 2,000 men on it. So he bravely, even though he didn't have any backup, went straight at them. He gunned down 5 of them, and he damaged a 6th. So he took 6 out of 8, Joe. It's not bad.
Okay, that's a level of impossible that I can only imagine it in like video games. So I'm just going to imagine like Call of Duty or something right there.
But one of the naval officers said this. What he estimated, because of course they count all the rounds that they send these fighter pilots up with. It's not like going to shooting range with your bow and arrow here, okay?
Right.
I guess you count your bows too, don't you? Your arrows?
Yeah.
Well, they said it was estimated by the commander that he used 60 rounds for each plane he destroyed. So he doesn't know how that's possible. He said, I don't know what's more extraordinary, his courage or his aim. But regardless, he saved the ship.
That is awesome. Now, because today's episode is basically about passing on talent, in this version, or in part 2 of Legacy, we're just talking about strictly, can you leave your kids with talent? Can you design, a legacy of talent for them? I like to imagine that if Butch O'Hare is going after these bombers, if his father had been on the deck, he would be like football game screaming. Like he would be like, "That's my boy," pumping fists, spilling his drink.
Doesn't seem counterintuitive to love to have your kid out there, let's just say on a football field, getting his brains bashed in a boxing ring, getting his brains bashed in. But in combat, as a naval pilot, you're watching your boy fly into his death, maybe.
Right. I do wonder, I mean, danger aside, is there just sort of like, is there something to the hormones of, I mean, we've talked in previous episodes. We had an episode about the World Cup and the Olympics, and we covered, what hormones you experience when you see your kid succeed. I wonder if it is about, if the violence is a component, and the danger, or I wonder if it's just simply the hormones of seeing success by somebody who is carrying your genetic code. I wonder if that's really what's doing it.
I went on a trip, like quad riding with my friend, and his 12-year-old son got in and was driving the big boy quad. And my friend, he grabs the back of my neck and he says, "Look at that stud. Do you know how good it makes me see the little man? What a little badass." I think that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's. I don't think it really matters if it's sports. Have you ever seen like Dance Moms?
Yeah. Hashtag crazy.
Yeah. There is. It does not matter what field, or it could be the field of battle, or it could be the field of dancing kids. Whatever your kid is doing, if you have set them up for that level of success, I think there's the hormones must be the same.
Well, I was in a bar once, and it was a joint restaurant, and there's not just dance moms; there were dance dads in there too. And these little girls, these kiddos, were dressed in so much makeup and wearing, in my opinion, very inappropriate clothes.
Right. So to get into this study, we wanted to answer those questions. We wanted to say, first of all, can you live through your kids? Hormone-wise, literally, are you experiencing the same hormones as watching like a team succeed? Or is it the same as like watching a small you succeed? And we also want to find out if you are placing your kid in sports or into something creative like dance, is there a difference? And, what are the chances that your kid will actually do better in one or the other? Like in the myth section, we said if you want a sports kid, you put them in sports. If you are Marinovich, you put your kid into football and nothing else. So that is actually the first study we're going to get to. I want to look at organized sports and if isolating an activity will create a super kid who can do that to the exclusion of other things. So this comes from the University of Texas at Austin. And they basically studied scores on creativity. And they wanted to look at kids who didn't do organized sports and kids who would do, informal play is the way they put it, playing informal sports. So basically like pickup games.
This is $1 million question. Are sports good for the kids' growth? And
precisely. Yeah, that's exactly right. We're trying to ask the question, are organized sports for children's growth? We know that...
exercise, moving around is good for you. But.
Yeah, exercise is necessary for kids, just period. Like you will have healthier, smarter, better rounded kids if they exercise. But when they looked at kids who only did organized sports, they found out in favor of activities that were traditionally associated with creativity, like art, music, theater, etc. The people who were above average, the kids who were above average, they did an even number of organized sports to disorganized or pickup sports, and they participated in art, music, and theater, whatever, like etc.
It's a little more well-rounded, not that laser-focused, obsessed on one thing.
Exactly. Yeah. What I would have assumed would be correct is the Marinovich or the Tiger Woods, where like if you want your kid to be good at a sport, you simply isolate that sport. You make them do that one thing.
You put the blinders on, and this is the only way we're going to get out alive is that you, the whole family's behind you. We need to make millions as the next Tiger Woods.
Right, exactly. I'm going to quote the study here. Quote, those scoring on the above average creativity bracket reported spending 15% of their total childhood in leisure time playing informal sports versus 13% playing organized sports. So almost the same amount of informal sports versus organized sports. And they scored the highest in creativity. So that is, we're immediately smacking that myth down. So that's a pretty quick turnaround for that.
You think some of us, they just need a break? The football kids and the baseball kids I know, by the time they're 18, they hate it. They're sick of it.
I think so. I also think that like most art and creativity and sports, basically anything that involves higher functioning in the human brain, I think they need something extemporaneous. They need to think out of the box. They need experience doing things that are on the fly. They need to allow their mind to sort of, I mean, like if you're focusing on learning, say like chess or something, you don't only play one type of chess. You experience different types of game setups and strategies, and you play different scenarios out. Like you even though it's so rigidly controlled, you do want to have like some free flowing thought in there at some point.
And that makes you better at your primary one.
It completely does, yeah. So that losing some of that rigidity helps. Now, we're not saying this because we want to encourage dance moms and football dads to better crack the whip. We're actually saying free play is a good thing.
These kids don't have any more time in their schedule. Their calendar is booked
Right.
between school and all their dancing.
I don't know why I'm imagining that football coach of a dad being like, oh, I get it, so I need to incorporate, like, I need to be like, now is your time for free play. You have, 1 hour, go.
I beg any of you to look up any Marv Marinovich's interviews. The scary thing about it, Joe, is he's shameless about it. He brags about the abuse he gave to his son. He's proud of it. He would do it again. If he had 5 sons, he'd do it to all 5 of them.
Wow, that is so wild. I'm glad we found that story. I'm really glad we were able to include that in Legacy. So do you want to talk about, zero doubt he is living through his son. Don't talk about how effective that is. Like, can you actually live through your kids and their accomplishments?
Yeah.
So to be very brief about a question we asked early, yes, you do have the same hormone level and the same sort of like feeling of victory watching your kid accomplish something that you want to do. We're going to use some research from Utrecht University in the Netherlands. And they talk about how we're going to have links to this, by the way. Please check out our notes. You can read the study. It's really good. But they talk about how parents who experience unresolved disappointment from the past, they feel pride and fulfillment when they can bask in their children's glory. And it actually has sort of like a emotional healing function. So if you were a failed football player and your kid is absolutely kicking butt on the field, it doesn't just give you the hormonal boost of seeing your team win. It actually like helps heal emotional wounds, like that unresolved feeling.
Really?
Yeah, it's wild. But that comes at almost a direct exchange from your kid. So,
I always hear that. This is kind of the old cliche, but you always hear some. I wasn't like that when I was her age. She's so far ahead of where I was. So that's kind of what I was thinking what you were saying.
Yeah, I think that's apt. Have you heard the theories that like every generation that new people do a sport, that the sport itself advances? That people find better ways to do it, especially because they are trained younger and they are, given better skills, better equipment that they're, not just parents, but like their old coaches and things didn't have.
Oh, absolutely. There's the muscle memory. There's better diets. There's new equipment. They also get better coaches. When I was a kid at Little League, you had one coach that showed up drunk once in a while.
Right.
It's not uncommon now for Little League teams, Joe, little kids, to have 5 or 6 coaches. Most of those coaches that played college ball, sometimes a lot of coaching staffs for Little Leaguers will have a major league ex-player on them.
I've seen that where like I used to think it was a gimmick where like you would see a pro basketball player or something, and in the news they would talk about how he coached his own kids Little League and things. I did not know that was as pervasive, as common as it is. So what does that do to a kid? If you are being quote unquote healed by your kid's accomplishments, it's not like your kid is not a wellspring of emotional healing. They don't have an infinite amount of emotional what do you call it, goodness? Like they're not going to be able to salve or bandage your ego. It does directly cost them.
So the pressure it puts on them.
Yeah, and that seems to be the biggest one. I would think that maybe you can hide that pressure from your kid. Is there a way at all to, if you're going to live through your kids, if you're going to like push them into a sport, push them into an instrument they're going to play, push them into dancing, is there a way to hide how much you're living through them? Like, is there any? I can't imagine.
No, because they know you. They have the same DNA as you. They've been around you all this time. They know when you're happy, sad. They can feel it. They can feel the joy, and they can feel the pride.
Right. I mean, they're trained to. Literally, evolution has given them this tool to where we had an episode about approval, and we found out that kids are basically built to see pride and see when you approve of them. So that is something that they are going to be hyper aware of. And in our last episode of this legacy podcast, we talked about how your behaviors stick with your kids longer than money does, because emotional stability and what do you call it, when somebody has emotional confidence, that carries on to your kids.
I just keep running this movie through my head right now. This little boy playing Little League, and he wins, and they take him to Dairy Queen and give him ice cream, tell him how wonderful he is. And then when he loses, they say, we're not going to get ice cream today. And then they browbeat him about all the mistakes he makes, and he goes home and cries himself to sleep. And I bet you that's extremely common.
I would assume so, even if it isn't as harsh as that, even if it's not on the surface. Just having your parents pay a little bit less attention because you didn't, win the dance competition that day. I mean, like it does take an effect on you. You are built to look out for that as a kid. So according to this study, by the way, that whole last section is Todd and I pontificating. That's not from Utrecht University.
They're going to sue us.
Yeah, exactly. But the first part, our quote about, parents who experience unresolved disappointment from the past feel pride and fulfillment. That is actually from the study. So we can at least deliver that in good faith.
I got to touch on this, Joe.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing how this show's ugly is, if the kid does not perform well, the parents will browbeat, scream, yell, swear, threaten the volunteer men and women that come down and are officiating.
Yeah.
Which is ugly. In front of their kids, talking to other adults.
Seeing a coach or an official have to come down and chat with your parents. I was gonna say that's the death knell, but it's like, no, that's your kid's first time they realize that, dad or mom is flawed, potentially.
And they don't just apologize and behave themselves at the next game. They double down and are even bigger jerks.
Right, exactly. So weirdly enough, our Eddie O'Hare may have had the right idea as a parent, being it's so crazy to say that a mob lawyer who was crooked and who had ties to Al Capone, giving his son sort of like the head and the leeway to do his own thing, to become a Navy pilot and everything. I mean, that might be strange that was a better parenting tactic than the overbearing football dad who wouldn't let his kid have a Happy Meal and forced him to throw spirals until sundown and things like that. But it kind of holds true. This study talks about how when kids grow up, the things that they struggle with when their parents live through them and lack that approval when they fail, they eventually struggle to form their own identities. They are absolutely at higher risk for mental health problems. They suffer from anxiety, depression, eating disorders. Like Todd Marinovich, he had severe addiction problems and severe anxiety. And these kids, they're usually good at masking their symptoms, so their problems usually go untreated until later. If you're wondering why these overachieving kids are sort of like I'm thinking about Olympic kids now, but like the reason why they go so long untreated is because they've learned from their parents. They know how to hide those issues and mask them and just look like good little competitors. And eventually they just engage in self-defeating behaviors, like Marinovich basically dropping out of football in college and just getting himself wrecked, basically.
And I don't know how familiar you are with this until you did the research for the show, Joe, about Todd and Marv. as much as of a jerk Marv is, I think we kind of think, in my head, you think, well, Todd's probably this jock bully just like his dad. He is the sweetest, nicest guy. And even though he squandered all this talent, this is the kind of guy you're like, oh, look what he did. He did drugs and ruined his life. You're actually pulling for him to get better. And through the years, he's gotten better. He's gotten sober. And then he's fallen back off the wagon multiple times. And if you listen to him, he's just a sweet, sweet man, and you're just still cheering for him that he beats this addiction before it kills him.
That's incredible. Yeah, that knowing that there's sort of like that process at the end, that finding an identity at the end can turn out like that it's hopeful. And if you're the parent, by the way, we're not just going to shame dance moms and football dads and then call it quits there. We do want to say that this article has a subsection called "How to Stop Living Through Your Kids." We're not really going to cover that. Needless to say, going and getting professional help is huge. But if you are dealing with past regrets or disappointments from what you didn't accomplish in life, there is still time and there are still accomplishments you can work on. There are still things that you can sort of do to build mental muscles. And just think that if you think that leaving your kid with a legacy of throwing a good spiral or having a dance trophy is going to do them well, they will be better served by you growing stronger and you being better equipped to accept the past and enjoy the present. That the more healthy you are and the more stable and mentally strong you are, that will leave your kids with a lot more than a trophy.
It just collects dust and goes to a storage facility. The arm breaks off and the memories fade.
Right, exactly. That thing will end up at Goodwill, whereas you, the parent, will not. You will be a good example for them in the future too.
And losing the 9-year-old championship is not the end of the world.
Right. So when we talk about parents who I mean, there is no bigger trophy than having an airport named after you. So
I think that takes it, right?
I want that. I don't want the little gold football or little gold baseball player with my name on it. I want O'Hare Airport.
A busy airport too. It's not some little crappy one in Boise, Idaho.
Right, exactly. If I had like a field airport named after me, I might be sad about this, but. So can we talk about I mean, I'm dying for this. We have spent 2 episodes building up to the battle that Butch won basically alone. How did this go down? Like this sounds, the more we talk about 8 bombers facing a single fighter, that's some Luke Skywalker stuff. So how did that happen?
Well, it's important to premise this with what was going on in World War II at the time. The United States aircraft carriers were the most valuable thing in the Pacific. So what happened was the Lexington, to protect the whole West Coast and the islands of Hawaii. So the Lexington was, by an admiral, Wilson Brown, was ordered. It had clear orders, Joe, and the orders were leave Pearl Harbor, cross the equator, and attack the Japanese. Doesn't get more clear than that, right?
Okay, so this is directly after Pearl Harbor. We're getting into like Doolittle raid kind of stuff.
So that's why they were where they were at. So Butch, and I guess they call him wingman. I've been calling him co-pilot. Listen to his co-pilot, Duff DeFillo. Duff DeFillo. Isn't that a great name?
It is.
It's like a fictitious character in one of your fantasy books. But Duff is legit.
Okay.
So they launched off the Lexington to go off, and they were reaching altitude. The other fighter pilots had taken off, and they had already at altitude and took off. And then they got radioed, stay where you are because we have bombers coming at us right now hot. And the count exact, between 1,900 and 2,100 men were on this boat. So if they would have lost that boat, lost all those lives, there's a chance they could have lost the Pacific.
Okay, and a carrier is a ultra hot commodity, as we said.
So the first wave goes through, and then Butch and Duff realize, and the Lexington is anti-aircraft weaponry, right? So they shot down a whole bunch of them. But then Butch sees there's a second wave coming. And so they said, we're going in. We don't have any backup, but we're going to save the ship. So the anti-aircraft weaponry shot down the first wave. This second wave, Duff and Butch were ready to go. So they kind of test fired their weapons out to see, and Duff's jammed. So now they're down to just the front guns. But they went in and they gunned down 5 of the 8, and they damaged the other 6.
If I didn't, if I wasn't absolutely sure that this Duff character was an American hero, he totally was. I'm making this up, but I would be in his position as the wingman, seeing 8 bombers coming after my ship. I would have been like, "Oh, oops, my gun is jammed. I have to go alone."
I would say, "What the hell did I sign up for?" I'm telling you, men were a lot tougher back in those days.
I totally believe that. So we covered that Butch is fighting 8 bombers, and he is spending 60 bullets or less on each bomber that he drops. What the hell are the people on the Lexington doing? Because what I'm imagining, you mentioned that there were gunners on the Lexington sitting behind those big guns. If it were me, I would just have a bag of popcorn. Like, I would just be like, this guy is taking down bombers.
No, this is not Hollywood. They are scared for their lives. And so they're going to fire at will. So you can imagine Butch and Duff are up there. So not only are they fighting these Japanese planes, they also got friendly fire coming in, trying to shoot them out of the sky. Hell no.
8 bombers shooting back at you isn't enough. You've got metal slinging up from the Lexington as well. That's stressful.
But Butch, when he landed, he was the hero. He had a young wife. He'd just recently been married. Her name was Rita. And it was April 21st, 1942. And they traveled to, guess what, our favorite, FDR's office.
Man, every time we do a World War II episode, FDR is like, he's waiting for them back at home to be like, I've been reading about you.
I'll speak for Joe when I say he's our favorite president.
It is, yeah. Every time he shows up in an episode, it's fun.
So there Butch is, Butch O'Hare, in FDR's office with his beautiful new wife, Rita. And the president, he promotes him on the spot to lieutenant commander, and he awarded him the Medal of Honor.
That is fantastic.
You can look up the pictures. You see the flash. I'm making flash things with my hands right now. I can't see it. And his wife, Rita, took the medal and put it around her handsome hero husband's head. Love it.
And then the music from the end of Star Wars when they receive their medals plays.
See, I think if you saw this in a movie, you wouldn't believe it. It's like...
Yeah, that's what I've been thinking throughout this entire story. It's so crazy. It's so over the top. Anyone who is writing it in Hollywood, they'd be like, no, that's not believable. Do it again.
But, military history says, and this is the big and long, short and long of it, it wasn't just the Lexington. It wasn't just the lives. It wasn't just Butch. It wasn't... If they would have sunk the Lexington then, there's a great chance we would have lost the World War II, at least on the Pacific side.
Okay. That is a legacy definitely worth leaving. So something that keeps sticking out to me, and we had this in our very, very opening narrative in episode 1. There's a lot of, I'd say, overlaps in the way sort of Butch and Eddie ended up in violent situations. You mentioned that Eddie had the father, Eddie O'Hare, had like a fascination with the Navy and flying and planes, and
he loved flying.
Yeah, and so I don't think that Eddie forced his kid to be in a plane all the time. I think it just is like a happy accident that they had a mutual interest. If Dad is interested in flying, why not?
Well, this is what I think. Butch was always traveling with his dad. His dad, anytime he was flying, he flew private planes, he flew commercial planes. He would always take Butch and put his hands on the, kind of like the Tiger Woods in the golf club.
Right.
He'd let him fly the plane. And that was his big. He sent him to a military academy. He was setting him up. It's kind of like a football dad. And then he had the heart to heart that I want you to be a hero. I want you to serve your country, and I want you to be a pilot. So that's kind of pushing him into it. I mean,
okay. So let's. Do you mind if we talk about the difference there? Like, what is the line between being an Eddie O'Hare, where you nurture an interest in something you like too, versus, Marinovich or like a Tiger Mom.
I guess it's not the same thing. If you bought him a plane when he was 6 and made him fly it to school or something.
Yeah, he
right?
sleeps
It's
in
a
the
little
cockpit. You don't come out of there until you spend X amount of time simulating a landing. We had an episode recently where we talked about how Elon Musk was basically had started his own Montessori-like school, and that his 5 kids were like making flamethrowers and stuff under like a private teacher. There's also like this old sci-fi notion that like eventually kids won't be raised to go through school, and they won't be like educated in classic sense, and they won't like play sports. They'll just be raised in like growth or learning pods.
Oh, this is like those places, Joe, where I'm not your teacher. I'm your friend.
Right. I'm your friend. I help guide you. So we're going to talk about Montessori, and we're going to talk about like the growth learning pod idea. Basically, what is the most efficient way to actually give our kids skills and to have them have a legacy of talent. Not necessarily the one we force them to have. Like, what's the difference between a dance mom who insists that you do the routine perfectly and, say, a mom who just helps her kid dance when she develops an interest naturally? Do you remember the sort of like Tiger Mom movement about 10 years ago?
I don't. What is it about?
There was, I think there's a book, Tiger Mom, but it now has its own wiki, and it is now a syndrome, Tiger Mom syndrome. It's basically children who are raised in less supportive parenting, and instead they're like forced to do an activity. I think the classic Tiger Mom was like forcing your kids to play piano or violin 8 hours a day or something like that.
Just no fun. I can totally see that.
Right.
The stuffy piano teacher.
Right. I tried to find the exact statistics on Montessori schools because the Tiger Mom thing is effectively what we're talking about with for the football dad and basically you can't force your kids to have a talent. You can only really nurture it, because if you force a talent on them, you end up with anxiety, self-esteem disorders, and depression, and potentially suicide if things get really bad.
So this Tiger Mom thing is like the parent has a vision for this kid, but the kid has zero interest in this subject or sport or art.
Right, exactly. They may do it. The kid may do it just because they feel like they have to, because of the parent. But in the end, what they're going to end up with is the opposite of talent. They're going to end up with crippling disorders. So I tried to find the best way to nurture talent. And what I could find, and this isn't just because it's currently trendy with celebrities to do this with their kids. It is actually seems to have a lot of good studies behind it, that it is effective as far as like ways to teach, which is Montessori. Have you heard of Montessori schools?
Yeah, we're all over the place here in Portland.
Yeah. Of course, we're a city of hipsters. Of course, we know what that is. Psychologists Angeline Lillard of the University of Virginia and Nicole Elsquest, which I think she's at Villanova, they went through surveys and they wanted to basically figure out how they started a Montessori school in Milwaukee.
Well, Joe, can I interrupt you? I don't know, because we both went to public schools. How are they different, the curriculum, the day, from what we're used to?
That's a very good question. So yeah, I went to a public school. I was given a stack of paper. We did what was called packet learning, which was a horrible middle step between textbook learning and standardized testing. And packet learning comes with standardized testing. Basically, public schools, everyone marches at the same pace. You're all given the same curriculum. If you fall behind, you repeat a grade, or if you fall a little bit behind, you just repeat classes, after school, or you're punished. You're basically punished if you fall behind. If you go ahead of class, there's no additional rewards. Sometimes if you're really far ahead, you get put into magnet programs or advanced classes. But generally speaking, it is like the Greek phalanx of education, where everyone moves at exactly lockstep pace and everyone learns the exact same subject. Montessori schools do the opposite, basically.
Wonderful description, though.
Oh, thank you.
Well done.
Yeah, Montessori schools, they effectively, you said the teacher is your friend. That is actually pretty close to the truth. The teacher is a guide. And
like
when
yoga teacher looking kind of.
Yeah, I assume that they look like they have just rolled out of bed and they're still in their pajamas. But they have a master's degree. But the goal of the teacher is to spot what is called a sensitive period. So at a Montessori school, they are trained to look for when a kid is receptive to information, when they are actually paying attention. If you're a parent, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's the period between SpongeBob and like the afternoon snack. It's when the kid is actually listening and is curious in that moment, and they're asking the why questions. And that is what Montessori teachers are trained to look out for, these sensitive periods where a kid will absorb information well. And that's when the teacher, it is their job to guide them to subjects that are appropriate for their age and their mental advancement, like how advanced they are for their age, and to sort of give them educational materials to that kid's interests. So they'll have a pool of things that they will teach. Like if they're learning about, say, the Oregon Trail or Civil War history or something, that's fine. But they will give the kids something that is like of the subject but is interesting to them, that will help them grow. And if that sounds like a really sort of touchy-feely style of school, it kind of is. But it has, according to these Milwaukee studies, it helps them enough to where it shows up on tests. So in this study, they talk about how like a variety of tests, ranging from letter word identification to math, the Montessori kids basically outscored public school counterparts in almost every test, while they are attending Montessori schools. They were more commonly resorted to reasoning. So like, if you're wondering what the advantage of that sort of free-form schooling is, they resort to reasoning 43% of the time, whereas the other kids were using more rote learning. So whatever they'd memorized while they were being marched into subjects like a Greek phalanx, they were using reasoning only about 18%. Now, would it surprise you to know that these gains do not exactly stick with kids if they are not still in Montessori later on?
So it washes off?
It washes off a little bit, yeah. In this study, I'll quote it directly so I don't mess this up. And this is a Scientific American link. If you want to click on it, it's a really good article. They say, quote, "These gains at an early age did not seem to translate directly to an older cohort of 12 years old that the researchers also tested. Both Montessori and regular school kids performed equally well on the skill test. However, the older Montessori children did write better essays based on blinded ratings." So if they drop out of that school or are taken out, some of that goes away, but they use more reasoning more often. They use their own reasoning more often, and they use they test well and higher on basically writing and essays, which shows a high degree of creativity.
So these Montessori schools, I'm guessing a lot less bullies and a lot more expensive.
Oh, yeah. When we talk expense, there has to be enough teachers at this school, at a Montessori school, to where they can stop and guide a child on their own curriculum. So that is not something where you can have one teacher for 40 students.
Yeah, in public schools where, like you said, there's 40 students. The pie is just, there's not enough pieces. So who gets all the attention? The two genius kids and the three behavior problems.
Right, exactly. And everybody in between wishes they were at a Montessori school. So I don't really this is pretty much this entire episode is about legacy, and how we leave it with talent. What the heck did Butch do? I'm gonna ask the grim question: why did Butch get a airport named after him? And it wasn't strictly for doing something that amazing. They don't name an airport after you if you're still alive, is pretty much the point I'm making. So what happened to dear old Butch, and what honors did he get for doing that?
Well, Joe, we've been doing the Re-Engineered show here for over a year, and we do a lot of military stuff. And the one thing that's always hard for me to digest is that we get these people like Butch O'Hare that do these amazing, brave, brazen, ballsy things. And my feeling as a human is if you already done all that, you think they would retire you. Like, you can kick back. You've done your part.
Right. You saved 2,000 people on a carrier. You'd think that'd be like, well, you did it.
Yeah, here's your pension and you're done. But these kind of people, the way these people are bred and what their DNA is, they want more. And his last mission, Butch O'Hare, he was killed off Tarawa, and he was doing a secret kind of mission. He was trying to intercept. This is an extremely dangerous mission. He was trying to intercept a Japanese torpedo planes. So plural, right?
Okay.
Multiple planes by himself, I'm sure. I'm sure he had backup this time. But the tactics he was using, Joe, they were in its infancy. They hadn't been used before, and he got shot down. He got killed. So just like his dad, just like in the narrative opening from the last episode before, he was killed, and he's staring straight ahead in blood, metal, glass, a violent death.
Bullet holes again. Can we? What all did he win? I mean, I don't want to be the materialistic jerk, but on our submarine episode with the Barb, we went through the medals that he got. So, can we get a? I'm sorry, I'm such a nerd. Can we get a video game score?
He would win. So this is what he got. The Medal of Honor is the big one, right? He got the Navy Cross, the Distinguished Flying Cross, a Purple Heart,
of course,
Combat Action Ribbon, American Campaign Medal, the Navy Presidential Unit Citation, the Asiatic Pacific Campaign Medal, the American Defense Service Medal, and the World War II Victory Medal. So you can imagine his dress white Navy uniform looked like a flag, man. There was no white on it.
It's funny you say. I was thinking about how many commendations and medals the Barb, like the whole submarine and the crew had. This man is just a walking, demolition crew. That's crazy.
Handsome hero too. When you go to our blog or go to our show notes, look him up. It's just look like that American hero. Okay, the year was 1947, and it's hard to think of O'Hare being a new airport, but it was a new airport at the time. And the McCormick, he was the publisher of the Chicago Tribune, and he's proposed that Chicago's new airport be named after Butch. And I guess it was told that he used to visit Chicago. He's not from Chicago, Joe. I thought that was interesting. I figured they'd give him one from where he's actually from, but he used to visit there with his dad all the time. So I think even Eddie's legacy, because the IRS agent, Wilson, he's a very famous IRS agent who took down Capone, he bragged about it in the magazine that he had the best informant ever inside the gang, the best undercover man he's ever known, and that was Butch's dad, Easy Eddie O'Hare.
That's awesome.
I think it's safe to say, Joe, that the O'Hares did nothing half-heartedly. If you're looking to pass on a lasting legacy, here are a few tips that are backed by science and statistics. Wealth doesn't last. 90% of family-owned businesses are sold or lost by the third generation. And the same holds true for vast wealth in general, with the bulk of the inheritance from a wealthy earner evaporating within their grandchildren's lifetime. Again, with 90% predictability. Living through your kids' accomplishments or forcing greatness upon them appears to be just as foolish. If the memory you leave your children is of mom forcing them to practice piano 8 hours a day, or dad making them throw the perfect spiral until sundown, the only legacy you're leaving is depression and anxiety. Want to leave a real lasting legacy for your kids? Teach them how to cultivate social skills by being the example. Everything you do in their presence will impact the way your children behave, from your emotional control to your aggression levels to your personal independence. The best legacy you can leave is leaving a good example. Instead of trying to bequeath your children mountains of cash, spend that money on providing a stable environment and educational opportunities. Instead of pushing your children to be high achievers, promote curiosity and reasoning skills. Your mantra shouldn't be inheritance and awards. Your mantra should be curiosity, reasoning, and reputation. After all, if Easy Eddie O'Hare had insisted on leaving his son, Butch, a shady law practice and a dog track, we might all be speaking Japanese. And say what you will about the beauty of the Japanese language, there's a certain ring to now arriving at O'Hare International Airport. You've been listening to The Re-Engineered You. Thank you so much for listening to the show. You mean the world to us. We have a new episode every week.
You can connect with us at www.re-engineeredyou.com. That's where we have research links, show notes, and blog articles for each of our episodes. We also appreciate feedback, and we love spirited debates.
We're not experts in anything, but we've got an opinion on everything.